in my business, one of the things that was sort of a key ingredient in succeeding and staving off competition from Asian countries, India and China in particular, where they do have capabilities, is the cost to manufacture my product has to be the same as or less than the cost to make it there, plus the logistical cost to get it from overseas into this country. So that meant buying the best equipment, having the most efficient operation, having the most skilled people.
A quick interruption to remind you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better. Hey, it's Ari Santiago. Welcome to another exciting episode of the Made in America podcast. This week, I'm with Norm Needleman, CEO of Tower Labs and a Connecticut State Senator. Norm, thank you so much for coming on today.
It's so nice to be here today.
Well, listen, it's the Made in America podcast, Norm. So we start off with the same two questions. What do you make and why do you make it?
Well, I manufacture effervescent products. I started the company in 1979 with a very specific purpose, and I've stayed true to that. The reason I got into it was because the company I worked for prior to starting this business needed an effervescent product, and I could not find anybody to make them.
Found a need, decided to make it. Here we go.
There you go.
Well, I definitely want to talk about the business. I think it's really an interesting business. I think people will be surprised, as they often are when listening to podcast episodes, to find out that there's very sizable businesses doing some really important niche stuff in Connecticut. So we'll definitely get into and maybe explain to anyone who doesn't know what an effervescent tablet is,
there you go,
what that is. But I think I really always enjoy sharing the personal story. And I think you've got kind of an interesting personal story from cab driver to teacher. Maybe it was teacher to cab driver to manufacturing. But maybe share with the audience, how you got from Brooklyn, New York, all the way to Connecticut.
Not a very long journey, by the way.
Very long journey.
My father owned a small grocery store in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, and I started working there when I was 12. And I had like one or two other jobs, working for the Italian bread baker that made bread for the store, and working in a bookstore for a while. And then at 19, I started driving a cab. The whole time thinking I was going to be a teacher, math teacher, on my way to becoming a mathematics professor. And when I graduated from school, I taught for 1 month, realized how remarkably unprepared and poor I was at that job. So I went back to driving a cab for a while, and about 4 months into that, I realized that I better do something. And I had gone out looking for a job. I had to go back to driving a cab for one last weekend. I ended up getting a job in a bookstore because I had that experience, and I picked up a guy in my cab who started talking to me, and I told him I was done driving a taxi. He offered me a job working for him because he had gotten a new computer system. And I said, the only course in college I ever failed was in computers. With all due respect to your business. I like theoretical mathematics. And he said, I'll just come in, I'll give you my phone number. So he gave me a little tiny slip of paper, and I called up. I went to do the interview at the bookstore. They offered me a job, and I called this tiny little scrap of paper with a number on it. And I said, this is going to sound very strange, but somebody gave me a phone number and said I should call about a job. The woman who answered the phone said, I know exactly who that was. And she put me through to him. As luck would have it, the man's name was Howard Stern. Grew up in the same town, ended up living in the same town in Old Westbury. But he offered me a job as assistant to the plant manager of that company. Did not know that the company manufactured barium enema bags, and I had no idea. I was put in charge of the enema tip department, but I kind of took the business like a duck to water, and over about 4 years, took on more responsibility. It was a rapidly growing company, and I became what would today be called the vice president of supply chain. And eventually, the day he hired me, I said, at some point, I will work for you every day as though this was my own business, but at some point I'm going to want to start my own company. And he said, fair enough. So 7 years later, I came to him because we needed an effervescent product, something that fizzed in water, but it was used for radiological studies. And he said, fair enough. You know, I found a guy up at Pfizer in Groton who said he would make the product for us if I'd be his partner. And I said, I'm willing to do that. They did some due diligence, and they ended up owning a small piece of the company for a while. And 41 years later, they're still a customer.
No kidding.
Yeah, he's long since passed away.
Barium enema bags, is that what you said?
Before they did colonoscopies and endoscopies, they injected your GI tract with that chalky liquid. They injected it one way and they injected it the other way. And they had the patents on the first prepackaged disposable barium enema. He was a brilliant guy, MIT graduate engineer. He had a partner who was a radiologist from New Orleans, and their partnership worked fairly well. And
what was the conversation in the cab that led him to give you his number?
That's a funny story, but it was, I knew I was done driving a cab. I knew I had it because all cab drivers in New York are driving until this happens or this happens. And my until was until I graduated from college and I got a real job. And then when I had to go back to driving a cab, it wasn't the best few months of my life after teaching for a while. And I ended up reluctantly going back that last weekend, which was 1974, coincided with the end of, it was Easter Sunday and the end of Passover, and he was coming back from Miami or somewhere in Florida, and I was driving through the airport not looking for a family of 5 people. And he literally jumped in my cab while it was moving, and because he needed to get out to his car outside of the airport where his housekeeper left it for him. And I just looked at him and I said, you're just very lucky I'm done driving a cab. I won't say what else I said to him. And then we started chatting, and he said, you don't sound like your average cab driver. And he was a real character, but he was a brilliant guy. And
it also sounds like it was a short ride. I mean, he jumped in
15 minutes.
I was going to say, it wasn't like he jumped in at JFK and you were, taking him out to Westchester or something. No. This was just taking him to the parking lot.
The best answer that he gave me, he got in and he said, I'll take care of you. And I said, I'm figuring that means, some extra money. And as we're driving, I'm hearing him jiggle change in his pocket, and I'm saying, this was not what I had in mind. And the only man that I ever knew that had a charge account at the local Friendlies. That was his view of entertaining customers. And, put it on my account. I was like, really, a charge account at Friendlies? But he was conversation was fairly short. And I guess he heard something, or he was just a lunatic, which he was a little bit of both. And it was, I did not know that assistant to the plant manager meant a gopher, right? Because go for this, do this. But it was a good match. And the plant manager, Howard was quite a mentor to me, and the plant manager was also a mentor. And it was a good start. And I had compound ignorance when I started the company in '79. I just did not know what I did not know. And so it struggled for a very long time. But once things evolved, it's turned out to be a very, very good business. And I've stayed true to what I said I was going to make at the beginning.
So before I get to that, because I do want to ask that, I think there's something very interesting about the beginning, because it's a lot of kids, one of the target audiences here, right, is people that don't know about manufacturing, maybe would think about a career in manufacturing, but just don't have any idea what it's all about. And so, you're a kid, you had a dream, or for some reason you wanted to be a math teacher and eventually a math professor. It didn't work out. What is it about you, or what do you think about was just made you so open, to giving, I don't want to say giving up's not the right thing, to recognizing that, I worked for this path, but this isn't the path for me. It's okay to change. And then being open to something different. I think so often in today's society, the kids are programmed to like get on a path and just stick with it.
Right.
You didn't do that, and you've been very successful.
I did not, and considering that the other part of my background was retail, I always have a fondness for retail. I frankly never want to make a living at it, but it is something that's interesting and because it's very interactive with people. But I think because I grew up in a grocery store, my father did every job, and I learned how to run the store until I couldn't bear it anymore, and I left working for him. But he taught me a lot. You learn a lot, but I knew the opportunity was born out of desperation in some regard. And it was interesting, these are numbers that don't make sense in today's world, but the job in the bookstore paid $165 a week, and the job working for EZM paid $150 a week. And I had to make a decision which one had more opportunity. And up to that moment, I did not know what he did. Literally, until he hired me, I didn't know what he did. So it was a bit of a shock. I'd never been inside a factory before. But the reason that I studied mathematics, amongst other things, was it at least teaches you how to think. You know, it presupposes that you're going to develop an analytical approach to solving problems. And I find, first of all, I find that you have to be open to the universe and you have to listen. And I've done that throughout my entire life and throughout my career. And, you know, I listened, and this was the right place to be at the right time. But obviously, I joke around with people, and it is not 100% of a joke. I've been luckier than smart. A lot of people that are smarter than me. But I've had luck, and I've met people along the course of my life that have guided me in some regard, but you have to be open to the universe. And I urge young people to listen to that little voice inside them and try to find what they do. But when opportunities come up, discriminate in your mind about what you think is the best choice, but be open. And a lot of people that come out of school with liberal arts degrees are not really trained to do anything. My degree in mathematics didn't train me to do anything once I was going to be a teacher. So,
thank you. So, but it's interesting, right? Because on the one hand, you talk about mathematics and being open. A lot of people look at math and think it's the most logical, sort of factual thing there is out there, right? 1 and 1 is 2, 2 and 2 is 4, and so on. But yet at the same time, you're sort of saying you've got to be open to other things. And listen, a lot of successful people talk about, or maybe all successful people talk about the role luck has played in their success. And certainly there's some part of that, but you have to be open to seeing it and taking advantage of those opportunities. Could argue that everyone could be lucky if they were just out there willing to accept the luck.
We'll never put our finger on what that secret ingredient is. I would argue that some aspect of it is desperation. Right? When the circumstances of your life are such that you need to do something, that's the moment at which the snap of the finger for me was waking up and being in that sort of dead-end job of driving a cab after 3.5 years of doing it until I graduated from school, and the desperation to know that I needed to do something. And had this not come up, I would have taken the job in the bookstore. And as we know, there are very few bookstores at this point. I don't think I would have founded Amazon. So
no, probably not. Probably not. The founder of Amazon didn't start in a bookstore either. So,
right.
The interesting question, two kind of points on the past, and we can move to the future, is you made a decision that said, I am going to take the lower paying job today because of the opportunity in the future. I'd like you to maybe just pull on that just a little bit, because a lot of people at a young age are faced with that decision.
Right.
And those can be difficult decisions to make.
Right. And, well, I have to preface that by saying, as a cab driver, I made twice that.
Well, so that's even more so, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you talk. I mean, a lot of people listening probably don't remember the cost of living differential between 1973, 74, and 2021, but obviously
Right.
it's significant. But regardless, you're looking at half, and then maybe another 25% or maybe 10 or 15% from
Yeah.
there. That's significant, right?
Yeah, it was probably the only time I really needed a short-term amount of financial help from my dad, who was very generous about doing that, but he didn't have a lot of money. I mean, I started my company when he sold his store, so he was 64 at the time. And like I said, the most valuable asset my parents had was the little row house that they owned in Brooklyn. But I had to make a choice. And you're right, there's this part of you that has to sort of look at the short term and the long term. And I don't even know what went into the decision that said, this is a better long-term opportunity. You know, and I did know people in the book business, and I actually liked that business. But this was just a better shot. It was something different. I got there on my first day, and I had no idea what I was walking into.
Did you know on day one? Did you have that feeling? Sometimes people feel like when they go somewhere for the first time, like, oh man, I was meant to be here, or did it? You said like a duck to water, but did the duck jump in the water right away, or did the duck wander around looking for some water first?
The duck got thrown in the water. They had set up this. That company was set into several little buildings. It was the end of the Arab oil embargo, and you know, you think the supply chain problems that people are having now are big. Back then, anything that was petroleum-based was almost impossible to get. So when the opportunity to buy stuff came up, you just bought it because you needed it. And you might have had a year's worth of inventory. So we had buildings and trailers all over the place. He wasn't going to run out, and those medical devices, disposable medical devices, were all plastic-based. So I was basically thrown into this building, and it was the Enematip building, and they said, this place is a mess, you know, production's a mess, it's secondary to the main building, go fix it. And I was climbing on racks and sorting through everything, and from there I ended up emptying all the trailers out, and, you know, I did know how to buy, and I did know how to sell from working for my father. And so the supply chain piece of it was natural. I'm a very good negotiator when it comes to buying stuff. So it gravitated from that. And of course, I ended up running the computer department, right? And learning how to program, even though I hated it. But I did learn that, and I took over purchasing first, and then the job grew to all of supply chain. And then it grew to vertically integrating that company into the items that they bought the largest amount of. So I set up factories in Canada and Haiti, and I was traveling all around.
Wow, what a tremendous experience. Just from going to the
lucky.
airport to pick someone up for a ride. But you know, you had to make the call, so that's great. So let's talk about Tower Labs. So you found the company. First, let's talk about what an effervescent tablet is and what the company makes. And you've said a few different times you picked a product and you stuck with it.
Right.
So
I picked the market. Just to go into the specifics, in my capacity doing supply chain at EZM, one of the products I needed was an effervescent gas-producing agent. We all remember volcanoes from when we were kids. You take some baking soda and vinegar. That's an acid and a base. And I am not a chemist. I mean, preface that. But I had made volcanoes as a kid. When you combine those two, you create a chemical reaction that releases carbon dioxide and it releases water. So all effervescent products have an acid and a base component to them. The product and it releases the CO2. What we needed was something to sort of distend the stomach like the inside of a football, so it got much more accurate.
Rather than pump the air in, you wanted to put a tablet in that would then have a chemical reaction with your stomach and create the air in the body. Yeah.
Prior to that, you would drink a large volume of fluid, and the stomach would get distended. But I don't want to get technical. Yeah. I'm not a radiologist, but but I played one on TV
That's
for a
right.
while. But it was what was coming down the pike were these diagnostic studies with, you know, all kinds of endoscopy, all kinds of cameras going in through endoscopes. And this diagnostic test, the upper GI diagnostic test with gas in the stomach, was much more accurate than the one that just filled the inside of the stomach. So the problem of finding a gas-producing agent was no easy task, because there were virtually no contract manufacturers of effervescent products at that point. So we started out making this granular product that was taken with some barium sulfate, and it created the gas on the inside of the stomach. What you said about pumping it in, that's the way they did it the other way.
Okay.
A little ball that, it wasn't a pleasant test. But it kept that business alive for quite a while. And still to this day, there are millions of those studies done because, one, they're a lot less expensive than being scoped.
Got it.
You don't need to put anybody under anesthesia.
So the commitment was not to a particular effervescent product.
It was that one initially.
But it was,
Yeah.
we're going to stick to some level of effervescent product across. And you were always interested in making the different tablets? Is that?
They were not tablets at that time. Those were granules like Bromo Seltzer or Briosky.
Okay.
You're all too young. You don't know
Yeah.
what any of those are. They don't ring a bell, do they?
No.
But what I found in doing due diligence was that there were no people who made any effervescent products. There was like some spotty stuff, and then the branded companies. At that point, it was Miles Labs. Now it's Bayer produced Alka-Seltzer. The big brand name companies made denture tablets like Efferdent and Polident. But there was really not anybody who focused on that. So I talked to the guy at Pfizer who helped me formulate the product that we were going to try. We were going to try to make it ourselves. We couldn't do it. I offered to hire him. He lived in Connecticut and had a farm and kids. And he said, I was not married yet. And he said, I'll make the product if you be my partner. And so we formed a partnership and we started making just that. The other due diligence was, and this was in 1979, Europe has a very large presence of effervescent supplements. So I always thought that there would be a market in the United States for that.
Like a vitamin. So you would just take a glass of water, throw in your vitamin tablet.
So you see emergency, and,
sure.
Airborne
Yep.
are those types of products. And so I was probably the first person to make an effervescent vitamin in this country. And then I gave up on that whole business. I
Did not
like
take
it.
off.
It's not that it didn't take off. It was, in my mind at that point, it was pretty sketchy. And I'm not a marketing guy. So we focused on other things. And over time, we got into denture tablets. We continued to make product for the company that I worked for prior to that. And I've made products that are cleaning products that were part of toy kits. I mean, I made literally every effervescent product that you can make. And some stuck and some didn't stick.
How many people are working at Tower Labs today?
Well, we have 4 factories. We have 3 in Connecticut, and we have 1 in Michigan, and I think we're probably around 300 now.
That's a lot of effervescent products being made out of there, it sounds like.
We make a couple of billion tablets, and now we've gotten into stick packs, the little...
No.
You know what a stick pack is? It's a stick with powder in it.
Oh,
You tear it up.
So that's more like the emergency style. You rip it open for the
that's a
powder.
4-sided pouch. The stick packs are the long, narrow ones.
Yep.
I think you'll see a lot of it. Kraft makes them for Crystal Light.
Yep.
I worked with Kraft for 8 years, working on tableted versions of Kool-Aid and Crystal Light, and they ultimately went with stick packs. Actually, initially, they went with ready-to-drink disposable bottles of Crystal Light and Kool-Aid.
And then now went to the stick packs.
Now they're in stick pack.
Got it. And that's also effervescent?
No.
Okay, totally different.
Yeah, they're hygroscopic, but they're not effervescent.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So how did the business, you're not a marketing guy, you're not a sales guy. How did the business grow so much?
Again, some level of luck and being in the right place at the right time, but also taking advantage of certain opportunities. There were bigger players by that time in the market in individual products. And I, like many guys who start a business, many people who start a business, undercapitalized in a business that needed a lot of capital. But I was friends with people who were in the used equipment business, so I learned how to buy equipment on the used equipment market. And, for example, a line that produces denture tablets, if somebody wanted to get in that business, would cost $7-8 million now. And every time any equipment that makes effervescent product comes on the market anywhere in the world, I buy it.
Really?
I have a whole warehouse filled with equipment. In part because I never know when I'm going to need it, but the barrier for entry for capital is so high that if I have it, someone else can't get it.
Wow. How long have you been doing that?
Ever since I could afford it.
Wow,
So 30 years. Yeah. I probably have 10,000 square feet of equipment.
So tell just, I mean, I know it's 1979 to 2021, it's a lot of years, but maybe just briefly, can you just touch on like different sort of inflection points in the business? You try to get off the ground, you're undercapitalized, you're using used equipment. Story we've heard from a number of manufacturers. I had an old Bridgeport in my basement, or I wanted to do something. The company had an old piece of equipment. I bought it cheap, or they took it when they were going to scrap it. And eventually they usually graduate to realizing they need better equipment. They graduate staff. I mean, a 300-person business it's a very sizable business.
Most of the growth happened from 2000 on. The partnership that I started with the guy from Pfizer lasted only 4 or 5 years. And
Really?
Yeah.
So the scientist who was sort of the chemist behind the product was gone in 4 years.
As they would say, it was not a match made in heaven.
No, that's correct.
And again, if you're analytical at solving problems, you'll figure out how to solve them. Making effervescent products is not a well-documented process. There's always things that people don't know. And he didn't know them any better than I did. So over time, meeting people, retired people from some of the bigger companies, and get the process for different products down pat. We got into the denture business pretty early on, but we were a second player to a couple of bigger companies. Then things began to shift in the industry, and we were able to take on all of that business in the early 2000s.
So what changed? So the business, I mean, how many people worked there in 1999, 2000, compared to the 304 factories we have now?
40, 45.
Oh, so it's really, I mean, the first 20 years was just sort of getting it started, and then it was the next 20 that really cranked it.
Yeah. Yeah, it really...
Did something change in the macroeconomic market for effervescent tablets, or did something change in the macro of your brain and way of thinking about how to run the business better?
No, I mean, I made some shifts over time. Just to give you an example, we used to make tablets and put them in buckets, and then we would pour those buckets of tablets into strip pack machines, and then we'd get these strips of tablets and we'd put them in boxes, and then we'd send them out for piecework, and people packed them for the specific customers. I made the leap at one point and bought a used integrated line, which basically made tablets to strip packs to carton them. And that sort of set the stage for my being able to do more, but what I was still missing with the customers, the big player in that business decided, for reasons that had nothing to do with me, to exit that business. And I knew that they were planning on doing it before they announced it to the trade and to the public. So I made a play for all that business, first with Walmart, and eventually we sell to every retailer in the country at this point.
Okay.
Every food, drug, and mass merchandiser. So yeah. And
who runs your sales force?
We have 4 people. Really, we don't sell per se. A lot of the private label is customer support. And these are customers that don't typically make changes unless you screw up. So it's repeat business. And that's the other thing I would want to say is making things one-off is, to me, very similar to driving a cab. You're only as good as your last fare. So the one thing I learned a lot of things working at ECM, but what the most important lesson was, if you're going to go into a business where you sell once and continue to supply forever, or whatever an interval is, 3 years, 5 years. In some cases, it can be 25, 30, 40 years. And we have a very small sales force, and my son and a couple of other people still handle the new inquiries that we get. Our business is split up now. Well, we took on all the denture business from the company that had 85% of it, and we had 15%. And then I called
85
that.
plus 15. I mean, I didn't go to school for mathematics, but I think that's 100.
The two of us had 100% of the market, 98%. And I called them up and I said, that plant that you were making that stuff in, do you want to sell it? And they said, maybe. And I didn't have any money, but I figured I'd act like I had money. And I flew out there to Michigan, and I went and looked around that plant, and I said, I'm willing to buy it. No money down. And they had withdrawn Alka-Seltzer cold medicine off the market because one of the ingredients in Alka-Seltzer was not approved anymore. FDA changed their status. But then it was coming back, so they opted not to sell it. But I did buy all their denture equipment, and 4 years later, their Alka-Seltzer business had sort of stabilized and flattened out, and they had decided to sell that plant. So I flew back out there and I bought that factory. And at that point, I had a little bit more money, but I bought this whole company for like $150,000 down payment.
There you go.
And
Gotta
now
take
it
those
does,
chances.
now it's got 150 people working.
They're working on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty good arbitrage there.
So, yeah, I'd say it was,
Smart move.
And it
So I want to talk about your kind of Act Two and your role as state senator briefly. But before I get to that, when you think about the positions that exist at Tower Labs now, what are some of the positions that people could have that work there? What do some of the careers look like? Like, what is it like to work at Tower Labs?
Well, I'm sure you've heard this in a repetitive way from people in the manufacturing world, but our society has it has so elevated the idea of the 4-year degree and so diminished the value of people who work with their hands or work in manufacturing that we thought that there would be this big shift. And, we've all want our kids to go to college, but unlike Europe, where there's a 2-track kind of a system, some people are way better off doing apprentice work and, post-high school studies. We've never done that. So you look at people who keep your machinery running. We have almost as many people in the technical and maintenance and electronics department as we do actual people who make product. It's a little bit skewed now because we're doing some stuff manually that we will be automating. But those skills are particularly hard to find now. The average age of our mechanics and machinists and electronics technicians are between 60 and 65. And that's industry-wide. That's all manufacturing. And those people tend to go to Pratt and EB and some of the bigger defense companies. So it's a struggle to now catch up. 20 years ago, Middlesex Community College asked me they were surveying businesses, what do you think they should go into? And I said, advanced manufacturing. They opted to go into medical, which also has a need as my generation gets cranky and old. But where businesses have created their own apprentice programs, we're all trying to be creative to entice people to understand that these are good careers. So we're always looking for more skilled people. Our business is definitely skewing into the skilled manufacturing area as opposed to people standing at the end of a line sticking boxes into cartons or tablets into boxes. And I will say that in my business, one of the things that was sort of a key ingredient in succeeding and staving off competition from Asian countries, India and China in particular, where they do have capabilities, is the cost to manufacture my product has to be the same as or less than the cost to make it there, plus the logistical cost to get it from overseas into this country. So that meant buying the best equipment, having the most efficient operation, having the most skilled people. So those are the kind of people that we're really short on now, because we've grown 25% each year in the last 2 years, which is quite substantial for us. We need solid rung of middle managers. It's hard to manage growth. You can go broke not managing growth well.
There's no question about that.
Yeah,
It's very difficult, and it takes a lot of different talents and a lot of different skills. You've talked about it, but as we've often said around here, you're going to have one set of problems. That's the better set to be trying to solve.
Absolutely.
Than the other one. And I just one point I think you made, but I want to just put a fine point on it, and feel free to agree or not. There's so many different opportunities at a place like Tower Labs. There are hands-on. You could be a mechanic, you could be an electrical engineer, you could be someone who wants to design, you can be someone who works with their hands. You've got sales, marketing, finance, I'm sure, recruiting, human resources, human capital management, middle management, opportunities to learn and develop. It's such an important thing that I always want to emphasize on these shows, because I think people don't really appreciate what it means to be in manufacturing in 2021.
For all the complaints about this, I'm going to throw on my other hat for a minute. For all the complaints about Connecticut being unfriendly for business, Connecticut has been good to me, right? I don't own factories in towns necessarily populated by factory workers, right? When I got to Essex, that was an inflection point, moving out of Westerly and moving into Essex and being taken under the wing by a real estate developer who built out the infrastructure in my plant and amortized it into the lease. But moving to Essex, I didn't realize how few blue-collar workers there were there. So we've had to figure out how to be creative and draw people from different areas. But yeah, we have up and down the scale, we probably have 50 openings right now.
There you go. And I think that's a really important thing. So many great careers there. And you said put on your other hat. So while we're there, let's get to that, because something that you and I talked about briefly kind of in prep for this interview, but clearly your passion came out right away in spades, was what you called your second act, which is sort of the community service, giving back. Clearly being a state senator, is a way of giving back. So I think maybe if you could just talk briefly about why you think it's important to give back, and then why this way of doing it.
Well, I ask myself that question all the time. But I look, anybody who's been successful in business, Warren Buffett says it much more eloquently than me. If not for the roads, if not for the infrastructure, if not for the education system, if not for all the things that make this country great, none of us would be successful, right? And if not for the luck, the good fortune, call it what you will. I'm not a religious person, but I believe in karma, and I believe that we're not here. There's no purpose in our being here. So I never thought that I would be in the business world. And for all the years that I was in the business world, up until I was about 50, I was kind of reluctant. I'm going to do something else. I'm going to make enough money, and I'm not going to worry about money, and then I'm going to, be a counselor or a therapist or a minister or whatever. And one thing that one of the mentors I had, a very successful guy who lived in Old Lyme, we listened to my whole story about wanting to do something different. And he said, let me just tell you that there's not much better than you can do with your life than being a good employer, because people depend on you. You have all those families that really rely on working with you and working for you. So that made it a little easier, because helping people was always part of what I wanted to do. But everybody who lives in a small town, you're always called on to do something, right? Whether it was being the treasurer for the Y swim team, whatever it was, or sitting on a board or commission in town, because a lot of the town governments are volunteer. I did those things, and then at one point a friend of mine ran for selectman, and he asked me to run with him, and I said, sure, why not? And I did that for 8 years. And then I ran for selectman when he came up to the General Assembly, and I'm still first selectman, and I'm running again for first selectman. But and I love helping the public. And I ran for Senate, even though it's a much more political job, because I have a deep understanding of the areas that the state can improve and some of the vulnerabilities of the state. So to me, I don't know if you've ever read, Andrew Carnegie wrote The Gospel of Wealth. It's actually a great essay. Interesting because it's not that old. It's from the late 1800s. And Andrew Carnegie was kind of unique in the very successful, industrialists of the 19th century, second half of the 19th century. This essay really speaks to the fact that if you've been lucky enough to be successful, it's great if you leave money to charities or donate money to charities, but it's more important to bring the talents that allowed you to be successful, whatever they are, to help people today in your lifetime, not after your lifetime. Getting your name placard on the side of a wing of a hospital is great. Somebody needs to do that. But the skills that made Andrew Carnegie successful were skills that he felt it was important to bring to society to help people. And I've kind of adopted that. I like to help. So this is my...
Do you feel that given the contentious, difficult to move things forward nature of politics, and I'm not making a commentary on today's politics, but I think in general, in a democracy, democracies are set up to not move too fast, right? Which probably has something good for it, but can be frustrating when you want to make change. Given that reality, and given how much you're able to do in business that is so much, say, faster, do you find it frustrating?
At moments, obviously, and the two positions are very different. First selectman and state senator. As a first selectman in a small town, even though, there's checks and balances, you're sort of an executive. You're making decisions. You have a smaller group that you have to please. I'm one of those people who believes that the closer to the end user that you that you deliver the services that the community wants delivered, the more likely it's going to be that you're going to get feedback, right? Good or bad. So I'm very attuned to the feedback there, and I think that I've been the longest serving first selectman, I think, in the history of the town. And the Republican selectmen on our board said, you could probably do this for as long as you want. People think you're doing a good job. I don't think it should be that way, but I enjoy it. And I've set it up as more of a management job. And you can get things done. You look at the town, you look at the condition of the town. It's not the hardest town. We don't deal with extreme poverty. We're not dealing with the issues in the cities. And it's not a secret. I'm a Democrat, and I'm a Democrat for a reason. But a lot of people, when I get to the Capitol, sort of think that I'm successful in business. I live in Essex. How am I not a Republican? And it's like, well, I see government as having the ability to do good for people. And some people don't see it that way. But not too many in Connecticut, to be quite honest with you. The battles that we have in the legislature are more of quantity as opposed to substantive. They're not, it's like...
Degrees.
Yeah, and I chair the Energy and Technology Committee. We don't have people that are arguing that climate change isn't real, right? I'm a moderate in a lot of ways. I'm a business person. I want to make sure that what we do is appropriate. We're a small state. A lot of people would like to push us out on a limb and do more than everyone else in every state, in every area. And the reality is the things that make us less competitive hurt people. So I'm that moderating force. I'm not a big out front guy. I'm a much more of a negotiator behind the scenes. And I think that in my 3 years there, I've moved the needle, and I'd like to be able to continue doing that. But it's not my nature to be a legislator. It's much more my nature to be a deal maker and a doer. So it's been at 68 years old. This was, when I first got elected, it was a real challenge.
Sounds like you're making some way with it. And I will say this on behalf of, I think, other people in the business community who feel similar to how you do. Keep up the good fight.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, let's go to a rapid fire round of questions, Norm. Are you ready?
Oh, it's my favorite.
All right, here we go. Red Sox or Yankees?
You want me to be diplomatic, or do you want me to
come
tell
on.
you the truth?
I mean, it's not diplomatic. Let's just go with the answer.
Last I looked at the standings, the Yankees were ahead. Go Yanks.
Starbucks or Dunkin'?
Oh, definitely Starbucks, but preferably neither at this point.
Staycation or exotic destination?
Rapid fire, huh? I'm more of a stay around guy.
Staycation. iPhone or Android?
Definitely iPhone.
Sports car or SUV?
She's going to yell at me. Both.
Both. What is your favorite business book?
I loved Good to Great. I mean, I thought that was really good. And I just finished one that I thought was fascinating because it wasn't a business book as much as it was a book about the history of business in this country called Inside Money.
Inside Money?
It's about the history of Brown Brothers Harriman, the
private
bank.
Got two things to add to my reading list this interview. Inside Money. Got it. If you could do anything in the world, and it had to be something different than CEO of Tower Labs, different than the first selectman, different than the state senator, what would you do? Could be anything in the whole world.
President of the United States.
There we go. What's one thing, Norm, that you learned early in your life that you think helped propel you to all the great success you've had?
It's an interesting question. I would say that within my nature, I never feel I work hard enough. My father was somebody who felt no one could do any job as well as he did. I have never found a job that I wouldn't rather have anyone else do. So I'm a manager by nature.
So that's something you learned early on.
Very early on. Mentors can teach you how to be and how not to be.
That's very true. What's something that you learned later in your life or later in your career that if you could go back and tell young Norm, and if he'd listen to you, you think it'd make a real positive impact on his life?
Respect your body a little more than I have.
Respect your body. Can't only get one of them. Might as well treat it like a little bit of a temple. Norm, it has been an absolute pleasure chatting with you today. I really appreciate you taking the time.
And I really enjoyed this, and thank you so much for doing this. It's really important to get businesses to understand, to get people to understand that you can't help people. I say this in the legislature all the time. If all we're focused on in my party is splitting the pie differently, we're not helping anybody, really. There's got to be some adjustments, but the pie has to get a lot bigger. And it doesn't get bigger without businesses being successful and without businesses taking care of the people that work for them.
Rising tide lifts all boats. Let's rise that tide.
There you go.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by IT Direct, a Compass MSP company.
As always, thank you so much for tuning in and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a community where we can learn and grow together. Your input, feedback, and engagement is critical to making that happen. Please do comment, like, and subscribe so more and more people can hear what we're doing and join our community of growth and success. Thanks so much for tuning in. Talk to you again soon.